Um, okay, so again, this refers to the parasitic worms. Helminth is a Greek-based term for worm. So the parasitic worms, and the worms that are parasitic on humans are from two phyla. We have the flatworms, as they're casually called. Their official title, the official phylum name is the Platyhelminthes. Platy for flat or plate-like, and helminthes for worms. And nematodes are the roundworms. I forget what the term actually means, but anyways, the nematodes are the roundworms. So not surprisingly, flat ones have a flat body plan, very thin and flat because they need to be. They're a little less sophisticated in terms of their body structure, so they have to absorb things. So they can't be very thick for that reason. The roundworms are have a little more internal structure to them, so they can distribute material internally a little better, so they can be a little thicker. They can be round. So they're all multicellular, obviously. They're all eukaryotes. They're heterotrophs. They're members of the animal kingdom. As we'll see, they have complex life cycles, and again, that just means there's more than one host for the parasites. Some contain distinct organ systems. Others, well, they usually contain some degree of distinct organ systems compared to, some other parasites where like a fungus doesn't really have that. So, a digestive system, that sort of thing. And we find that some don't really have that just because they depend on their host to provide all the nutrients for them. So, for example, a tapeworm. A tapeworm just absorbs material that you digest for it. Now here's our two groups. Okay, the flatworms, the Platyhelminthes. There's always exceptions, but with most of them are what we call monoecious, one sex or one gender. And that means basically they're all hermaphrodites. Okay? So individuals produce both gametes, have both types of gonads that produce eggs and sperm. So there's no boys and girls, so to speak, or males and females. So that's typical of the flatworms. Flatworms, they have a more primitive sort of body structure, and they typically have just one opening called a proctostome, and anus mouth. Ew. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, if you ever, think about it, you really appreciate that evolution developed to a point where we have a two-ended digestive tract instead of a one-ended digestive tract in which nutrient material comes in, you digest it, and then expel the waste out where it came in. That's what these guys do. So that's called a proctostome. It's easy to remember because procto, what does that sound like? Proctologist. Okay, so a proctostome. Okay, stoma, mouth, or opening. So somebody had a hand up for them. All right. So, and again, two distinct classes: the trematodes, which we commonly call the flukes, and the cestodes, which are commonly called the tapeworms. Okay. So these are very common human parasites. Then the roundworms, there's a whole bunch, but most of them aren't parasites, but some of them are. They're a little more, anatomically sophisticated. They appeared evolutionarily a little bit later, and again, they actually have a mouth and an anus. I don't know if that's up here or not, but there we go. So a complete digestive system. So they eat at one end and poop at the other, like we're supposed to in a sense. They're typically dioecious, so di meaning two sexes, males and females. All right, and then we're just going to look at two examples. Okay, there's certainly a lot more, but pinworms and hookworms. There's also, ascaris, and there's also another roundworm causes elephantiasis. If we have time at the end of the course, we'll go over that. That's actually a fascinating disease just because of the awful disfiguration it causes. So you've heard of that, also known as filariasis, but elephantiasis, when people have the horribly swollen lower extremities. It's all because the lymphatic system is clogged with little dead worms. And even scarier, it's transmitted by an insect vector. Okay, so a little sandfly. What's that? Oh, vectors and carrier. Looks like the mosquito is the vector for malaria. Those sandflies can transmit this little worm parasite. You know, and it can be treated with drugs, but the problem is if there's too many of them, you kill them, they're still clogging the lymphatic system, which can't really be cleared. So, hence all the lymph kind of collects in the lower extremities and it's really off. So yeah, you can get some pretty nasty diseases from parasitic worms. So we'll start with the trematodes, also known as the flukes. And you know, this is I'm not going to test you on the anatomy of a fluke. It's just showing the basic kinds of organs they have. Okay, you can see their testis and ovary, so both gametes. So it's again monoecious. It's got little suckers to hang on. It's got a rudimentary digestive tract, and it's just going to absorb. It's very flat, kind of a flat leaf-like shape, and just absorb its nutrients from its surroundings. And here's a liver fluke. This is a common fluke. There's also blood flukes and lung flukes and so forth. So all members of this class, they're all parasites. Okay? And just they're referred to by what organ they tend to take up residence in. Okay? And again, they typically have multiple hosts. A lot of times it's a snail, some kind of aquatic snail, and then human or crayfish or something like that. As we mentioned, monoecious. Again, they absorb through the outer layer is just called the cuticle, so it's kind of like the skin. And so they can cause, you know, fairly serious long-term disease, mainly due to inflammation. It's kind of an interesting thing about the immune system. It does a lot to protect you, but in some cases it does more harm than good. So by sensing something foreign and creating a lot of inflammation, you can get organ damage, which can be significant. So schistosomiasis, heard of that one? That's the blood fluke, and it's a very common disease. Did you choose that one? Okay. So you got to tell me all about it. And then here's the blood fluke, and just the basic life cycle. I'll try to keep this one fairly simple for you. You can see you have the human and you have the snail. So the aquatic snail and the human. So it has, in this case, just two hosts. The definitive host is Homo sapiens in this case. And so it all starts with this. It all starts with eggs, you know, eggs from human fecal material. So just one reason why sewage treatment is really important. Not because the majority of poop is all that dangerous. It's disgusting, obviously, but a lot of pathogens, parasites, viruses, you name it, dangerous bacteria. That's how they leave an infected host. And then people come in contact with any of those organisms and they can contract the disease. That's the danger. So like, you know, you don't want your neighbor pooping upstream. You get your water from the stream, right? Because you can be exposed. Okay? And again, you know, we're going to do something later on where we test water for evidence of fecal bacteria. So, you know, and, you know, there are standards, like when they test, you know, lakes and beaches and so forth. And if it's above certain levels, then they close it and they, you know, whatever they can do about it, they do about it. It's not, again, it's not so much that the fecal bacteria are in itself the danger, but it's kind of where there's smoke, there's fire, where there's poop from lots and lots of potentially different people, there's bound to be some dangerous organisms that passed out of them. That's the whole idea. So sewage treatment, good thing. So in some parts of the world, you know, there's not as good of treatment of sewage as here. So it's not unusual for an infected person through fecal material to contaminate a watery environment that then somebody else could be in. And even though it seems clean, there's some disease. Okay? So the eggs exit in fecal material. They go into one developmental stage. For this is, you know, it's called the myrcidium. And then they develop and they infect their snail host. Okay? The snail host, they develop into yet another stage called the Hercaria, as you can see. And these are little swimmers. Okay? So these go directly for the snails. They develop into a different stage of their life cycle, this little swimming Hercaria, and that is what directly penetrates the skin. So somebody with exposed skin in the water it can imperceptibly penetrate the skin, get into the bloodstream, and then make its way to the appropriate organ. And then as it reproduces, eggs are deposited in the digestive tract, and they come out with the fecal material, and the whole cycle starts over. So that's the general life cycle of the blood cause of schistosomiasis, which I think we'll look at more carefully later on. Now, tapeworms, we're all familiar with those. Again, they're another type of flatworm in the cestodes class. They have a particular characteristic structure to them, and you see that? That nasty little structure is, you might think of it as the head. It's not really the head, but it's where it hangs on. Okay? So it has literally little hooks, and it hooks into and hangs on to the intestinal wall. And then from there on down, it gradually, it's like a little repeating ribbon, and it has repeating segments called proglottids, that term right here. And in there are the, both sex organs producing egg and sperm, and it can reproduce with itself or with a partner, and then they'll, develop into eggs, and then you have very much larger, as you go further down, much larger and more mature proglottids that have eggs that eventually detach and pass out again with fecal material. And then, for example, a common, some kind of grazing animal will be grazing and inadvertently eats some grass or something that's got a little bit of this on there, because, could have been a wolf or something else, or a human, pooped in the grass, and then the cow or the deer or whatever ate some, and then, we'll get to the life cycle on the next slide, but then the eggs will hatch and develop into a certain form. They'll form a little dormant cyst in the muscle tissue, and then whatever eats the muscle tissue, the meat, after that, can contract the tapeworm in its gut, human or wolf or dog or whatever. But anyways, those proglottids, the gravid ones as they call, gravid meaning basically pregnant, that's what detaches at the end, and that's going to pass out and potentially pass on the parasite. So they're not super dangerous. They just steal your nutrients. In fact, I remember seeing a Monsters Inside Me episode. Every now and then, I don't know what to watch, and that's on. It's kind of fascinating. I remember there was, it was a different one. I think it was called 1,000 Ways to Die or something like that. I remember there was a woman who wanted to lose weight, and someone suggested she just take tapeworms. So I guess she got a source of tapeworm, larvae, and took too many. If there's enough of them, they get beyond the digestive tract into other organs. So that she had in her brain.
Wow.
So yeah, she didn't make it. So anyways, don't ever do that. Just change your diet and exercise. Okay. So here's the general life cycle of a tapeworm. What time we got? Okay. So there she is. Okay. So here's, you can see a big tapeworm. They're big, obviously. They can be really big. So again, these, the eggs end up in, material that the grazer will eat, and then they develop into larvae that exit through the, the intestinal wall, get into the muscle tissue, form a dormant protective cyst, and then if this burger wasn't cooked well enough, she's going to get a tapeworm. Or if she's eating raw meat for whatever reason, she'll get a tapeworm. Okay. So that's the idea. So one advantage of cooking is killing any potential parasites that might be in there. You know what a good source of parasites is? Sushi. Yeah. No, I eat sushi too. So they always have to examine the fish very carefully to make sure there are no parasites, no worm parasites or anything like that. And they also have to freeze the sushi. I don't know if you've heard of that, but they got to freeze it because a lot of these are actually killed by freezing. Not necessarily all, but a lot of them. A lot of these, worm larval parasites, they, in the muscle tissue, freezing can kill them. So freezing pork and freezing, fish before they make sushi is important for them.
The same thing is said for people who eat raw steak or medium rare?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. I think medium rare. It's going to be heated. You know, meat has to reach a certain temperature, of course, to kill whatever's in there, but yeah, you're certainly going to have a greater risk by eating raw meat. You know, tartar, I guess, as they say. Okay, so that's the basic life cycle of tapeworm. Again, just going from, you know, again, humans are going to be the definitive host. That's where sexual reproduction occurs. And there's going to be an intermediate host, which is the cow. What's that?
The actual X-ray of a person?
Yes. Yeah, apparently so. It looks like one to me. Yeah. So, yeah, they can be pretty big, feet long. So if you're wondering why is that microbiology, the eggs are microscopic to some degree, so that's why.
So when they say they mature, like when they mature, they exit through fecal matter?
Yes.
So when you're, like, one day you could just be going and then you see like a long string?
Yeah, people, yeah, they can be visible in fecal material, yes. And again, there, you know, once it's known one as a tapeworm, there are drugs that can treat it. So we'll address some anti-helminthic drugs later on. So it's not hopeless, but they're not super duper dangerous. You know, and again, as long as there's not too many, it's just losing nutrients. I don't know why I remember this. There was a kid who used to watch the Three Stooges all the time. You guys know who they are? Yeah. Well, that's the movie reason. I don't know why I remember this, but there was one little clip where one of them was eating really, really awful food. I was like, why are you eating that? It's like, oh, that's good enough for my tapeworm. So, okay, moving on to nematodes. Pinworms and hookworms are examples of human parasites. Pinworms, again, aren't really a huge deal. They're treatable with drugs, but they're very common. Typically kids. We'll see why. Because kids tend to do things that adults don't. A lot of things, okay. Like, you know, kids will play in the toilet for God's sake, right? Oh, little floating things, how fun, right? So, we all know kids who've been caught doing that. So, now, pinworms, the only host is humans, so it's not a complex life cycle. Humans are the only host, okay? And so basically, well, the large intestine is where they hang out. If I was a worm, I'd frankly like to be somewhere else, but that's just where they like it. So in the large intestine, males, females get together, they mate. So, and then what happens typically at night, when the host is asleep, the pregnant females, they go down to the anus, and they literally crawl out and lay eggs on the anus. So you know what a common diagnostic tool is for pinworms? Scotch tape. Anybody ever had a kid who had to go be checked out for that? Anyways, Scotch tape on the kid's anus and look at it microscopically and see if there's eggs. Yeah, and it's gross. And and apparently it triggers itching. So obviously that's going to favor transmission. So the kid's got eggs down there, the kid scratches, then kid's hands are all over everything, right? Right, toys and things, playing with his other little friends. Kid puts toy in mouth, mission accomplished, right? So just by physical, you know, from basically hand to or underwear to some other surface, eventually onto some hands that go into the mouth, and that's how the eggs get transmitted. Then they're in the digestive tract, and they hatch and develop and start the cycle all over again. So that's the nature of pinworms. All right, so again, like the other ones, they're dioecious and etc. Now hookworms, a little more disturbing. Hookworms, hookworms actively, here's the mouth of a hookworm. They actively bite off little pieces of intestinal lining. Yeah.
I have a side question. So
Sure.
Do they have eyes?
What's that?
Do they have any eyes?
I don't think so. I don't think there's a whole lot to see down there. Pretty dark, but.
So like how do they know? Like how do they know where they're going?
Oh, I'm sure they. Yeah, it's a good question, but I guess once they're in the environment that's, I guess, in terms of chemically, they can sense where they are chemically, and that'll trigger development into the worm. So for example, the eggs aren't going to develop in the stomach, they'll pass on down to the large intestine. And then they'll sense where they are chemically, and then they'll develop.
Wait, so that was another question. So how would they, if they travel to the anus, how would they know they're there?
Oh,
They
good.
their eggs instead of inside.
Good. That's a very good question. How those pregnant females know where they're going?
Yeah.
Um,
Sense of direction. This is the place.
Yeah. Do you have an idea?
Don't they just move based on parasitic movement?
Well, apparently they actually crawl out to the anus and then crawl back in.
Exactly.
I think they noticed like it's comfortable here, like this is a perfect place to be.
How do they know that though?
Yeah, no, you have a good question. I don't know the answer, but it's a good question. I mean, they do have some degree of sensation, so I guess they, and maybe they just, they're going in a random direction, and if they don't find their way one way, like the bacteria, they go the other way and eventually find their way there. I don't know. Good question. Okay. You like this topic? Okay.
But wouldn't like the acid in the stomach actually kill some of the ones?
Well, no, the eggs, yeah, they're going to be just like the cysts, like the tapeworms. They're going to be protective. They're protective coatings, so they can survive the harsher environments. Then, when they end up in the environment that's ideal for them, that'll trigger development from the dormant cyst or our egg into the adult form. Yeah. Okay, we ready for hookworms? Okay. So these hang out in the small intestine. Again, you got males and females. They have cutting blades or plates that actually do excise bits of nutrient material from your intestinal lining. They, again, and then when they don't crawl out to lay eggs like the pinworms. They just lay them and they just pass out with fecal material. So, and then they, if the fecal material ends up anywhere on the ground where people would walk barefoot. So this is more common in areas where people, there's not much, there's not the kind of sewage management that we have, and warmer climates where people frequently don't have footwear. So if you come in contact with the larva, they again, kind of like with the Prokarya, with the flukes, the blood flukes, they go right into the skin. So they would imperceptibly go through the skin into the blood circulation, and they actually exit the lungs and get coughed up with mucus. And it's very common to swallow mucus. And so hookworm larvae contained in the mucus will then go down by being swallowed to the digestive tract, and that's how the whole cycle begins. So again, humans are the only host, and but in this case, they actually do exit the human host during their larval stage. So the eggs hatch into larvae, and they're just waiting to have someone walk by with exposed skin, and that's how they get into a new host. Whereas pinworms, it's just basically sort of eggs being on surfaces and getting into the mouth.
Would it be visible if you cough up the
That's a good question. I don't know how visible they would be. I don't think they would be that visible. So they're not really that big. Yeah. So that's the adults though. So the larvae are going to be, here we go. Yeah, 3 millimeters. So yeah, perhaps that's pretty small. But yeah, I've never seen them. But I suppose if one looks carefully, it might be visible. It's not really a problem here, so I wouldn't worry so much about it. But if you know someone's pooping in the grass, don't run around barefoot. All right. So this is just, again, summarizing the life cycle here, so I won't go over it again. Don't worry about these. In this case, also with the flukes, there's some new terminology for the various larval forms. Just know the life cycle in general, and don't worry about that terminology. I think you have enough terminology to worry about. All right, so we're probably almost chapter 12. Oh boy. I was hoping to be done a little sooner, but like those. So how do tapeworms obtain their nutrients? What's that? Well, they don't have one. But more specifically, do they bite off pieces? Do they swallow anything? Do they even have a mouth? No, they absorb. Right? So the flatworms, they're basically absorptive. They absorb nutrients through their cuticle, and they're very flat and thin, so there's not a whole lot of thickness for materials to have to diffuse through, so they can get by just absorbing. So they're absorptive, kind of like the fungi in that way. The life cycle of a pinworm, again, you can start wherever you want, but say pinworms are already present, how do they exit the host? Okay, right, so the females lay eggs on the anus of the host, and primarily due to inducing itching and scratching, eggs end up on fingers, which end up on other things, which can be transmitted to other people's fingers, and which can then put things in the mouth. Okay. So it's pretty obvious why young children are much more likely to contract pinworms than adults, because they're just active and hands all over things, putting things in their mouth and so forth. Okay. So we're done with chapter 12. This is as far as the exam goes. I'm debating whether 5 minutes is worth introducing chapter 5. You want to see that? Okay. Let me take it. Okay. Let's just go home already. 5 minutes isn't going to make a difference. So we're officially a full chapter behind, or a full lecture behind. That's okay. It's not the first time. So we will start chapter 5 next Thursday. So Tuesday, the entire period is for the exam. Let me just say, I got 5 minutes. So let me